What's up, guys? Welcome back to the third Addison's Advocate podcast. And this one, as you'll notice, is in person, which is super wild. This is something that I never thought would happen. Obviously, we know that Addison's is super rare. So to be sitting here with another person who has Addison's disease is actually like really, really wild. The last two have been over like Zoom and stuff. But this time we are in Seattle, Washington, interviewing Mauve, who we'll introduce shortly. And she's got a lot of wisdom to share. She has only had Addison's for a short period of time, all things considered, less than a year. But she has gone through a lot of stuff, which she'll get into. And I think she's going to be able to provide all of you guys with a lot of really valuable information.
My name is Mauve. I am 30 years old and I live in Seattle, Washington. I'm an artist, I'm a teacher, and I was diagnosed not that long ago.
Yeah, not long ago at all. Do you want to talk about kind of like how this all started for you? Like what kind of transpired to kind of throw you into this whole new world?
Yeah. Okay. So I think, like, looking back in hindsight, I think I started to show, I think like my big stressor happened in like January of 2022, and I lost a lot of weight, but I chalked it up to like, oh, it was a breakup. Like, that's why I lost weight. And then over the span of the year, I just never gained back the weight. But I just like assumed that was like my new norm, to be 20 pounds less than I had been. I started to just like notice, like, if I would drink, I would be so hungover the next day. And I started getting like more tired. And then by the time like December had rolled around, that was like a year later, that next December, I started noticing like I was just tired all the time. And at the time I was like getting ready to do an art show. So I was like teaching full time, and then I was coming home and I was painting, working on a collection. So I was just chalking up like feeling fatigued to like I'm working a ton. Like I'm essentially working 2 full-time jobs right now. That's why I feel tired. And because I was so busy, like I wasn't going to yoga anymore. I wasn't going to the gym. And I was like, well, this is what happens when you're almost 30 and you stop exercising. Like, you just get more tired. Yeah. And when I say tired, I don't just mean like I was feeling sleepy. I was like walking up the stairs and I would feel like out of breath, exhausted. Or I'd be carrying in groceries and my heart would just be like pounding.
Yeah.
Or I'd be trying to like clean up the house, and because I'm kind of messy, but I would like have days where I would just like power clean.
Yeah.
And I could not get through like cleaning.
The simple things.
The simple things. I would like start something and I would just need to like sit down and rest.
Did you think that was weird?
I was again just like chalking it up to like I haven't been exercising.
Yeah.
And I've been working a lot. And then I started noticing that I was like craving salty foods more. Like I was going into the kitchen and literally opening up a salt grinder and taking out pieces of salt. But I just assumed like that was like a weird, quirky thing that I did.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was anything out of the ordinary. Like I've never had a sweet tooth, but like salty stuff I've always liked. So when it like escalated to the point where I was taking salt out of the grinder, I just thought it was such a slow progression leading up to that point.
Yeah.
That it didn't seem it didn't seem out of the norm to do that. That started happening, and then I remember in February I traveled to Colorado, and we were up at super high altitude, and I just like felt like kind of off. And then that night I started puking my brains out. I got a migraine with an aura, which I haven't had one of those since like I was 19 in college. And I puked my brains out. Everyone thought I was drunk. I was not drunk. I just like was so sick and I had the worst headache of my life. And I remember the next day, like we ended up leaving to go back home, and the whole car ride I just felt like absolute death, which makes sense because 2 weeks later is when I actually had my crisis.
What happened in between like the 2 weeks between like that in Colorado, and then was it like a super fast decline, or did you just feel crappy for 2 weeks? Or
I just felt kind of crappy, but also not more crappy than I had been feeling.
Yeah.
The thing with Addison's, or at least for me, is that it happened so slowly that it just became my norm. Like I was used to waking up and feeling tired, and I was drinking tons of caffeine. Also randomly, like right before all of this happened, like around February too, I was getting rashes all over my body. Did I tell you about this?
No.
I was getting rashes, so they put me on a round of prednisone. And I remember the rashes went away and I felt a bit better, which makes sense now because like obviously that's like hormone replacement.
Yeah.
I just like figured it was some sort of like, I was having some sort of allergy and I was sick and I was around kids all the time. So I was just used to it.
Mm-hmm.
So we came back from Colorado and I felt like shit, but I was used to feeling like shit.
Yeah. Did you go to any doctors during this point? Like, when the year of you being like, not being able to do like simple tasks? You're like, I'm going to go get a checkup, just figure out what's going on.
No, because I was still doing so much that I just assumed that I was feeling that way because I was doing so much.
Yeah.
Like I was
just overexerting
working
yourself.
full time. I was having a full social life.
Yeah.
I was painting a ton and I was just trying to do it all. And, earlier in my 20s, I was constantly like burning myself out like that. And I just told myself, this is what happens when you get older. Like I'm almost 30 this year. So it's like harder on my body. And I just need to, when everything settles down, start going to the gym again.
Yeah.
Which is actually what happened right before you're reminding me. Because I came back from Colorado and I felt like crappy. And I was like, okay, I need to start like working out again. So I started doing hot yoga, which was like my form of exercise leading up to everything. So that week that I had my crisis, I had gone to hot yoga on Monday, I had gone on Wednesday, and then I went on Thursday, which is when everything happened. And I remember I could not hold any poses. I was so shaky, and I was thinking the whole time in class, like, this is what happens when you're almost 30 and you stop working out and you stop being consistent.
Yeah.
But I was taking that as like motivation, like, okay, I'm going to keep doing this because I need to get like my strength back and I don't want to feel this way anymore. And I came home from yoga class and I had therapy on Zoom. So I like immediately came back from yoga, opened my computer and hopped on the Zoom call. And as I was on the Zoom call talking to her, I went from like talking normal to all of a sudden I went blah, blah, blah. And I saw myself on the Zoom screen and I was like, what did I just say? And I went to apologize to her. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm tired. I don't know what's going on. And as I'm like going to say that to her, I'm hearing blah, blah, blah. Like, my words are just gibberish. And she looked at me and she was like, take a breath. And we were both just like, what the hell is happening?
Yeah.
She stayed on camera with me. And then she kind of was like walking me through. And I was trying to talk to her, and it was just gibberish, blah, blah, blah. And then finally I could talk again. And I was like, I don't know what's going on, but I need to leave. She was like, okay. So I closed the computer, and my arms were so tingly. And I felt like auditorily, like my hearing, it sounded like I was, like things were just out of balance and weird. And I was like, okay, something is not right. Like, what the hell just happened? I need to get to the hospital.
Yeah.
And I live like really close to the hospital here in Seattle. So I remember I called my boyfriend and I was like, something's off. I don't know what's going on, but this just happened to me. So I'm going to go to the hospital. And he was like, okay, will you stay on the phone with me? This hospital's like a 5-minute drive from my house. And in hindsight, like I should not have driven, but like I didn't know what was happening. And so I got in the car and I started driving to the hospital. And here in Seattle, it's like the University of Washington Medical Center. And from my house to get to the hospital, I actually drive by the University of Washington, like on that strip to get to the hospital. And he asked me on the phone, where are you? And I said, I'm at the University of Montana State.
Oh, no.
So my wires were getting all sorts of crossed. And just like for backstory for the viewers out there, like I'm from Montana originally. So I had gone to school at the University of Montana, but there is in Montana State University. So there are 2 separate universities. But in my mind, I was crossing both of them into one while I was at a completely different campus in the state of Washington. So like my wires were all sorts of crazy.
Yeah.
And so as I'm saying that, I'm hearing, like in my brain, like I'm fully cognizant.
Yeah.
But the things that are coming out of my mouth are not aligning with what I want to actually say. So when I hear myself say that to him on the phone, I'm like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
And at that point, all of a sudden my arms went tingly again and I couldn't lift them. So I was driving.
While you're driving?
I was driving down here, like on the bottom of the steering wheel. And I was like, oh my God, I have got to just like get to the hospital now, which luckily I was like right there. I was a minute away. So I pulled in, and by the time I walked in, I couldn't lift my arms because they wanted you to put a mask on.
Oh, yeah.
And I couldn't lift my arms. And I told them that. I said, I can't lift my arms. And they immediately brought over a wheelchair. They called code stroke on me. And they took me back to do, what is it called? Like a CT scan, I think it?
Yeah.
And they were doing that. And then as they were doing the scan, they were showing me pictures. And in hindsight, like, I know what the pictures are. I can see them in my mind right now. There was, like, a little boy and a girl, like, grabbing cookies out of the cupboard. And the mom was, like, washing dishes in the sink. And they showed me the picture. And they're, like, pointing to things in the picture. And they're like, what is that? What is that? And I knew that I knew what the picture was. But it was almost that feeling of when you have a word on the tip of your tongue and you can't, like, quite get it, but you know the word. That was the feeling with the pictures. And so all I could say to them was, I don't know. And I was just crying. I said, I don't know. And then they were like flipping through more pictures. Like there was one, a cactus, and I couldn't say what they were. And so I was just totally freaked out. I'm like, what the hell's going on? I hate talking about this, kind of. It's good, but it also is like kind of traumatizing.
Kind of brings it back, yeah.
They did the CT scan and everything was fine. I wasn't having a stroke, thank God. And they took me back and they put me in a bed, and I had the worst headache of my entire life, just like a terrible headache. At this point in time, I was worried about what was happening in my brain. Like am I having a stroke? I'm what? And they were not worried at all about what had just happened with my speech and the CT scan. Instead, they started talking about my sodium. And I was like, okay, I don't care about the sodium. Like, I care about, like, what just happened with my brain. Like, is my brain okay?
Yeah.
And a neurologist ended up coming in, and he said to me, what happened is that your sodium is so low that it essentially triggered a migraine over the speech centers of your brain. So I was like, oh my gosh, like, because 2 weeks earlier when I was in Colorado, I had that migraine with an aura, and that's why I was like puking my brains out in Colorado. So I was like, oh God, like I'm having another one.
Right.
And I had, in the past I had a migraine with auras over like my vision, where you get like the black or whatever.
Yeah.
But I had never had something over my speech centers before.
Yeah.
And he told me, he's like, sometimes like it just happens. I'm like, well, what if it happens again? Like, what do I do? And he's like, you just drive back in and we'll go through the same process, blah, blah, blah. But he's like, from like a neurological standpoint, like we're not concerned about your brain. Your brain is fine. It was just a migraine, which now I know, like having gone to the neurologist, like post all of that, his explanation of that wasn't like entirely accurate. What the neurologist told me now is when your sodium gets that low, it affects you at such a cellular level, affects like the water within the cell and around the cell. And they said when your sodium had dropped so low in the speech centers of my brain, those cells there were impacted. It was like directly being impacted there, and that's why my speech was wrong. It wasn't a migraine. But at the time in the hospital, during like the story, I thought it was a migraine. They told me it was a migraine over the speech centers. So I was like, okay, all right, I guess we got to figure out this sodium thing. And they were telling me my sodium was really low, which people in the Addisons community, like we know that the normal range is 135 to 145. Mine was sitting down at 117, which after my headache, so I had a terrible headache, but they gave me like the migraine cocktail, which is, they like mix a whole bunch of things and IV you. It didn't really help, which kind of makes sense because it wasn't a migraine. It was because my sodium was so low. But I remember just like powering through this terrible headache, trying to sleep. And I woke up in the morning and I needed to use the bathroom super bad. And they were like, we're going to bring over a bedpan for you. And I was like, no, I do not need that. I will walk my ass over to the bathroom. Like, I'm good. Because after that headache when I had woken up, the headache was gone. I felt normal.
Yeah.
Again, like I felt shitty, obviously. Like I felt shitty, but I had been feeling shitty for a minute.
Right.
So I was like, no, I can walk myself over there. And the nurse was like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah. So I stood up and she was like untangling all of my cords and this and that so I could like mobily walk to the bathroom. And as I'm standing there, I was like, oh, like my heart, da 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 da. And I started seeing black spots.
Yeah.
And she was like, you need to sit down.
Yeah.
And at that point, my blood pressure was like 80 over something. And then I was put on like the fall risk or risk fall.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And
a
you're just
fall
like
risk
not
or
allowed
something.
to like stand up and walk around
Yeah.
independently. So I was feeling I was in a lot worse shape than I actually thought I was. And that's when I kind of realized, like, okay, like, I'm not out of the clear. Because I was thinking, I'm just feeling this way because I had some sort of migraine. It's over with. Like, they're just trying to get everything figured out. But when I stood up, I was like, okay, no, like, things are still weird.
Is that what they were doing? What were the doctors doing at that point? Were they just trying to like stabilize your vitals and stuff? Or were they trying to think like, hey, there's something deeper going on?
Yeah, I think they were trying to figure out why my sodium was so low.
But you were admitted at this point. You were like a day in.
I was still in the ER. So I
Oh,
wasn't.
you're still in the ER.
I was still in the ER. I wasn't up like in a hospital room quite yet. I was still like in the back in the ER sitting. So they had done the CT scan. They had left me sitting there. The neurologist had come and talked to me. I had fallen asleep, and it's like early into the next morning. It's like maybe 4 or 5 a.m.
Okay.
And that's when I'm trying to stand up to go use the bathroom.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I'm not out of the clear yet.
Yeah.
Because like sometimes when you go to the ER, like you're there for hours and you're
yeah.
fine, and they send you home.
Yep.
I thought this was like
Same thing.
just part of the process. I just felt weak and tired, and I fell back asleep, and then I woke up and there was an endocrinologist in my room. She was awesome. She walked in and she sat next to me and she goes, are you usually this tan? And I was like, well, my mom's from Spain, so like I have like Mediterranean skin. And then I was like, but now that you think of it, my sister had a baby last summer, and whenever I'd like hold him and I would like see our skins next to each other, I'm like, we just look so different. He's like so pale and I look so dark. And I like mentioned that. I'm like, I actually have noticed like I am like staying pretty tan. I usually get really tan in the summer, but February in Seattle when there's no sun, like usually like my tan is long gone.
Right.
But I had stayed pretty tan throughout the year. And she goes, okay, can I see your hands? And I went like this with my hands, and she looked at them and she goes, okay, this is what I think's going on. I think you have adrenal insufficiency. I think the next few days, the doctors are going to put you on a high dose steroid. It's going to stabilize your sodium. Then you're going to leave here and you're going to work one-on-one with an endocrinologist to come up with a treatment plan. And I was like, okay. And then she left. And so that's kind of what I assumed was going to happen. They're going to put me on high dose steroid and whatever. And I had been on steroids. I was on steroids a few weeks earlier for my rashes.
Yeah.
And I've had like terrible allergies and stuff in the past where like they've done steroid shots and things like that to get rid of like hay fever and stuff like that. So being on steroid for me was no strange thing to hear. I thought it was like a temporary, you do a round of steroids and then you're done with it.
Yeah.
She leaves and they fully admit me into the hospital. So now I'm taking from the ER and I'm in a hella bougie, like Levi. It was a penthouse suite in the corner.
Really?
Yeah, it was sick looking over the sound. So at this point, like I'm feeling pretty good. Like
Yeah, you're kind of stable.
I'm kind of stable. Like, and by kind of, I mean like my sodium's 120. Like,
Yeah, which is like not, but
it's not. But like
yeah.
I'm feeling, no different than like how I've been feeling for weeks. My
Yeah.
headache's gone. I'm like whatever. Like I'm just gonna be on some steroids. I'm like, what's going on? They won't give me any water. Because what they're trying to do is just raise your sodium naturally. And one of the ways that they can do that is by not giving you any fluids. Because if you're not taking in fluids, you're not peeing out sodium.
Right.
So I just am very thirsty.
Did they have you like hooked up intravenously?
They did not have me hooked up to any sort of sodium.
Interesting.
They were just trying to raise it naturally by not giving me water. Because at this point, they didn't know for sure if it was adrenal insufficiency, so they weren't treating me that way. That
Right.
endocrinologist was a referral lady who came in, a referral doctor, I should say, and she said, I think you have this. And she told that to my medical team. However, they did not give me a high-dose steroid.
Are
they
we surprised?
Gave me
No.
a low-dose steroid. And shit hit the fan. Because my body, instead of continuing to raise sodium, when they gave me the low-dose steroid, things took a turn for the south. All of a sudden, my sodium started dropping, and then my potassium started going high. And they were doing blood draws, and I remember they came in and they were like, oh, your potassium's high. And at this point, I was getting very anxious. I was like, I've been in here now for 2 days. and I've had time to like Google on my phone about low sodium, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not good. And then when they told me my potassium was high, I looked that up on my phone, and I was like, oh no, this is really bad. And so I remember the doctor came in, and he was so nice, and I was like crying, I was so nervous, and he goes, listen, it's probably a fluke. Sometimes when we do blood tests, they can be a little jaded. He's like, your potassium is probably not that high. We're going to run it again. And then they ran it again, and it was even higher. And they were like, all of a sudden, there was like 10 nurses in my room.
Yeah.
They hooked me up to like the heart stuff. They put an IV in me. They're like, we need to raise your sodium and we need to get your potassium down now. And so they gave me medication that essentially like makes you like flush out potassium out of your system. And they gave me medicine to protect my heart because I was at risk of going into cardiac arrest. And then they did hook me up to sodium to try to lift it. They're like, no more like waiting for it to like naturally raise. Like we need to like balance it out because it started to go even more south. And I was just like so scared. I didn't know what was happening. It was the middle of the night, all these doctors. And an hour before, the doctor told me it was probably just like a fluke draw and that my potassium is probably not that high. And now it's higher. I was just like, this is so terrifying. The only person that was there was Sam, who is like my boyfriend, and he was just like super awesome. I remember when all those nurses were in my room and I was just crying and I looked at him and he was so calm. He was like, you'll be okay. It's okay. He's like, you're in the best place for this to happen, which is like true. But so I was like really grateful to have him there with me. But yeah, so they hooked me up and then they put me on the high dose steroid. Like knowing Addison's, it was probably 100 milligrams. Yeah. They probably put me way up there. And then all of a sudden, things started to stabilize. Slowly, my sodium started to come up and my potassium went back down. They were doing blood draws every 2 hours. And I was in the hospital for just about 6 days.
It's a long time.
It was a long time.
They were just trying to get you up?
They were trying to get my sodium up. And they ended up releasing, what's it called? Discharging me. And it was at 134. So, like right on the cusp of being normal. Yeah. University of Washington is a teaching hospital. They have a med school there, so everyone that's there, there's like doctors that teach on the campus, and then they're also like the head doctors there at the hospital and people in med school. So my team was like 5 doctors come in my room, and they are all staring at me, and they go, do you understand what's happening? And I had like however many days to research, and I was like, yeah, I think my adrenals aren't working, so I don't have sodium, so I need to take a steroid to help my sodium. And they're like, yes, we are a teaching hospital, so we teach about Addison's disease, but we've never actually diagnosed it. And then I like kind of realized like there's so many doctors in my room right now because they're literally using me as like an example of someone with Addison's disease. So I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it was so rare. And like the look on the doctor's face, like trying to explain that to me, like we don't diagnose this often.
We don't see it at all.
But we teach about it, and that's how we knew you had it. And in hindsight, like I actually feel very grateful for that. I think, you know, and especially becoming more educated about the Addison's community, sometimes people go years without answers and they feel like shit for a long time, and they just don't have doctors that can place a diagnosis on what it is because it is so rare, where a lot of doctors will go their entire career without ever actually crossing paths with it. So I feel fortunate that, you know, I was at the hospital that I was at and I was able to get a diagnosis within a few days versus it being a few years. Yeah. But yeah, when they told me that, I was like, holy smokes. And then I left the hospital and they told me to go pick up my prescriptions down in the pharmacy. And at this point, I didn't fully understand the magnitude of it. I thought that I was going to take my steroids and then I was going to get better. I didn't like fully realize this was going to be a lifelong condition and a lifelong situation in which I'm always at risk of going into another crisis. Like at that point when I left the hospital, it hadn't fully clicked for me. So when I picked up my emergency injection kit, I was like, why do I need this? And I remember they had given me a follow-up doctor's appointment 2 weeks after the hospital. It was scheduled for 2 weeks. And then I wasn't going to see my endocrinologist for 3 months.
Yeah, and you're probably like, dude, what?
And I'm like, what? So when I'm holding this emergency injection kit, I'm like, I don't even know how to use this. And I have my pills and I'm on such a high dose steroid too. So I'm like, my anxiety is like out the roof. I'm like, what is going on? And then I started, trying to do as much research as possible to learn about it. And I was like, okay, I have this follow-up doctor's appointment in 2 weeks from now. So I'll get some more answers then. But in the meantime, like, what in the world? So I'm like trying to learn as much as I can. And I remember I go for my 2-week follow-up appointment. And it was just like a PA who like sees people after they leave the hospital to make sure they're feeling okay. And I came in with like so many questions.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he said, I don't feel comfortable giving you medical advice because I'm not familiar enough with Addison's disease. And I just remember I burst into tears. I was like, you expect the doctors to take care of you. And here is my first real interaction with the doctors don't know. It was like all of these peaks of mourning were lining up. I was mourning my old self and like now having this like new illness. I was mourning my belief system about the medical system. I'm like, doctors are supposed to know, and this doctor's telling me he doesn't know and he can't help me. So it was just like this intersection of so many things. And I just remember I cried my eyes out. I was like, what in the world? And I felt so disheartened. And I had 3 months to go until I saw my endocrinologist, and it was awful. It sucked. And then it's rare. So then there's no one I can talk to about it. I don't know a single other person that has Addison's disease. I think I needed that moment of like feeling I am on an island all by myself. The doctors aren't on my team. No one's on my team but me. I think I needed that moment because it really like shifted things within me on how I was like going to go about it. When that happened, I was like, okay, let's get back to basics. Like step number 1, I need to find other people that have this disease. Like I need to go ham online, search people on Instagram, send cringy cold call messages to people. Found the Reddit, honestly, shout out Reddit. The subreddit for Addison's disease changed my life. I've learned 95% of everything I know from Reddit because I didn't learn a single thing from the doctors at that time. And I went in on the Addison's Reddit community. I found you on Instagram. I was like psycho ex-girlfriend. I was like clicking on anyone who had a tag, finding their profile and finding their profile. And I just was like, I need to find people. And I also want to shout out Jill from the Pickle Jar podcast because I found that on Spotify and I reached out to her and she hopped on a Zoom call with me immediately. And this was right after that doctor's appointment, right when I needed to be finding people. And I found her and she was just so open and warm with me and talked with me for 2 hours on Zoom and then gave me her phone number if I ever needed to text her. And I needed that. I needed to feel like I wasn't in this alone. I think between Reddit and Instagram and Spotify, finding Jill's podcast, I started to create for myself this sense of digital community because within this geographic space, there was no one.
No.
But I needed that. And then I was on a hunt for education. I was reading absolutely anything I could find about Addison's disease. I was posting in the subreddit. I was going back and reading old posts and articles and taking notes of what is a stress dose? What is an up dose? Because they didn't tell me any of that in the hospital.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Which is so weird.
It's so important.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Even for you to go pick up your emergency injection and be like, what is this? Why do I need this?
Oh, and that was the thing. I had asked that one doctor during that appointment.
Yeah, the PA.
The PA, I'm like, how do I use my emergency injection kit? And he goes, well, you only need it during emergencies.
You're like, when were you going to tell me that?
And I said, I know that I only need it during emergencies, but how do I use it during that emergency? And he was like, oh. And he pulled up WebMD in front of me. And I was like, sir, I am on WebMD all night long. I don't need to pay to come here for you to pull it up. I could do this.
Yeah.
And still, he didn't really tell me how to do it, or at least that I know of. I think he tried to, but it was so off base. It wasn't until later when I got mono, 2 weeks later.
After your discharge?
Yeah, oh my gosh, yeah. Okay, so where do we go? So I had that 2 weeks follow-up appointment. Guy couldn't help me at all. And then all of a sudden I started getting swollen lymph nodes everywhere. And at this point, my anxiety is so high. I'm so health aware. I make another doctor appointment and I explained everything. I was like, this is what happened to me. I was in the hospital and then this other doctor told me he couldn't give me medical advice and now I have lymph nodes. What is going on? And he was super cool. He's like, I'm going to run full panels on you. We're going to test you for mono, because who knows, maybe it's that. He took the time to pull out an emergency kit and show me how to use it. And I was like, thank you for just taking the time to show me, because I just needed someone to show me. So he was super cool, and lo and behold, I was positive for mono. So not only was, I'm freshly diagnosed and I'm going through this steep learning curve and kind of this mourning process, but now I have mono, throw that in.
Yeah.
Which, like, I didn't even get mono when it was cool, like back in high school. Like, now I'm 30 years old, like I'm in a committed relationship, and I am very germ conscious. I never share drinks with people. So I'm like, how the hell am I getting mono now?
Yeah.
But the way he explained it is like, I could have been exposed way back in adolescence, and mono is like one of those things that stay in your system. And he goes, if you go through periods of high stress, that can actually like bring it out again.
Oh, yeah.
So he thinks that maybe like my immune system was just so crazy that it like reemerged, which I'm like, oh, just my luck. But so anyways, I'm dealing with mono, and at this point, I'm like, the little things we like tell ourselves when you're going through a hard time. I'm like, okay, I need to come up with like a 6-week plan. And 6 weeks from now, I'm going to be so much more prepared to deal with Addisons and take my medicine. It'll be so routine. And in 6 weeks from now, I'll be over mono, so I won't be so tired. I'm also going to do core every day, because hell, I'm going to get a 6-pack in 6 weeks. Like, just like anything. So I'm like just trying to like go through the motions of like, I'm having this huge life adjustment, and I just got to put my nose to the grindstone and get through 6 weeks. Like this magic number of 6 weeks for me.
That's what you set?
That's what I set for myself. In 6 weeks, I'll be over mono, I'll be an Addison's expert, and I'm gonna have a 6-pack.
Yeah.
So I'm out there every day doing my core, and I'm trying to adjust, and it's really hard, and I feel really shitty, and I feel, now I know it's like I'm feeling low because my medication is not right.
Because you're on hydrocortisone.
I'm on hydrocortisone at the time.
Yeah.
And I knew from my own research that if you have an infection or cold or whatever, you need to be taking more. Again, at this point, I'm not having a doctor guide me on any of this.
So nobody told you like the double dose
No one told me that at all, but I'm learning about it. So I'm like, I'm blowing up my endocrinologist on my phone because I still have not gotten in because my appointment's for 3 months out.
Right.
And so March is when I got diagnosed. April is when I got mono. And my appointment still is not until like June or something like that. And I'm blowing up the endocrinologist, and I'm like, listen, I am newly diagnosed. I don't know this disease. I know what I'm reading online. I just need someone to help me. I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, please, can you get me in sooner? And I think I sent enough messages where they're probably like, she's a liability. Like, we need to get her in.
Yeah.
So they got me in, and I told the doctor, I'm like, listen, and I have mono. Like, I feel like I need to be changing my dosage. And he's like, sure, we can change the dosage. And I was only taking it twice a day. I was taking 10 milligrams in the morning, 5 milligrams in the afternoon, which is 15 milligrams of hydrocortisone. It's not that much.
Yeah.
And I was feeling like I was on death's door right before I would take my afternoon dose. And then I would also feel like I was on death's door around 7:30 at night when my hydro was like out of my system. And I had read online about people who split their dosage 3 times a day. So I had brought that up to my endo over like the text messages before I got in. Can I do this? And he was like, sure. So I was doing then 10, 5, 5, and I felt a little better. But then mono happened, and I was like, I think I need to be taking more. Do I need to be taking more? Because I had read online you're supposed to, but I had no one telling me this.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what do I believe from what I'm reading online? And he said, sure, like you can take more, do 10, 10, 5. So now I was up to 25 milligrams. And I started to feel great. I'm like, wow, I feel better. But I was still like having a lot of anxiety. Like I was peaking and crashing, which is very typical of hydrocortisone. So it's the peaks and the valleys. I still wasn't feeling great, but I was like, whatever, in 6 weeks from now, my body's more adjusted to this, and I have a 6-pack, and I will be feeling great.
Yeah.
Like it's like almost like a cruel joke, because right at that 6-week mark, I started getting stomach pain. I didn't know if that stomach pain was related to Addison's or not. And I'm sure like many people in like the Addison's community can relate to this. It's like sometimes it's hard to know what's a normal person thing and what is a byproduct of Addison's disease. And so I didn't know if this pain I was having in my stomach had anything to do with Addison's. And I had seen somewhere online about how a lot of times when people get low and start sliding into crisis, they can have a lot of abdominal pain. And so I was like, oh, like maybe that's happening to me because it hurts. It like really hurts. And I was like, I'm not going to take any chances. And I grabbed at this point, I knew enough to have like a medical to-go bag with my emergency kit, my hydro, all of that stuff. And I grabbed it and I took it and I went to the hospital. And as I was walking into the ER, I remember I took a step and I had the sharpest pain in my stomach and I buckled over and then the pain went away. I still went in and I checked in and I was sitting there and I'm like, Mauve, you're like, I'm fabricating this in my head. Like I'm too tuned into my own body. And so I ended up going back up and I said, I think I'm fine. I'm going to go home and just wait this out. And I went home. And then the next day, the same thing, like pain, but this time it was worse. And so I went into the hospital. I had my medical to-go bag. Like I did all the right things. I brought it in with me and they took me back and I was in tons of pain. They gave me some pain medicine. They did a CT scan to check in on my stomach. And as I'm sitting there, like I'm feeling better. Like the pain's like not really happening. And they came out and they said, hey, like everything looks good, blah, blah, blah. Take some Tylenol to kind of pain manage. And I remember I looked at her and I was like, I was in so much pain about 5 hours ago. I don't think Tylenol will work. And she's like, well, just try to stay on top of it. And if it gets worse, you can always come back in. So I went home and I took my morning hydrocortisone and I went and got the smallest thing of soup because my stomach just still hurt, but not as bad. And I ate the soup and within 10 minutes, hell hath no fury. Like the day before was child's play. Oh. It was the worst pain of my entire life to the point where I knew I could not drive. So I called an Uber because again, I live pretty close to the hospital, called an Uber. And as I'm in the Uber, I feel like I'm going to puke, which we know with puking and Addison's disease, that's very dangerous grounds. To describe this pain to anyone out there, it would be like a 20 out of 10. The highest pain you can imagine. That was the pain I was in. And I felt like I was going to absolutely puke my brains out, but I'm in an Uber. So I'm like, please don't puke in here. Like, and I left in such a hurry. I didn't bring my medical bag with me because I had been at the hospital the last 2 days prior. And, you know, I got in relatively fast and whatever. And I think, it's like, I'll just go to the hospital and they'll take care of me. As soon as I got to the hospital, I fell out of the Uber on all fours and I just started projectile vomiting. And I was like, oh no, this isn't good. Pretty much crawled into the ER to check in. And the pain was so bad, and it was a full house in the ER. They told me I had to put a mask on, and I couldn't keep a mask on because I was puking. And so they told me to go outside then if I couldn't have a mask on. So I went out to like the front doors, and I was literally on all fours like a dog. And I was just puking my brains out for hours. And I was like the sounds I was making was like insane. Like I've never heard like my body. Like I was like crying for my life. And I knew I was going to go into crisis. And they took me back to triage and they did my blood pressure and it was extremely high. It was like 140 over something, which I know now like that can happen when you're in extreme amounts of pain, which for Addison's is always like the low blood pressure. They sent me back out and I spent another few hours puking my brains out. I thought I was going to die. I got to that point where I was like, if I died, I wouldn't have to feel pain anymore. And like that felt like relief. Then they finally took me to a room and I remember the nurse was like yelling at me to stop screaming, but I couldn't. I was in like the worst pain of my life. And when I was out in the front before they took me back, I was asking, I was like, please, like I need my emergency medicine. I have Addison's disease. I'm going to go into crisis. And I was like, please help me. I'm going to die. Like I need my steroids because I didn't have my bag on me. And they wouldn't do anything. They wouldn't do anything. So I was like, oh my God, I'm literally going to die in the ER because they're not giving me my steroid. And we need to have that immediately. If we puke, and I've been puking for hours and I'm in the worst pain of my life. And we know that when we're in pain, like we're cortisol dumping. And by the time they took me back, the nurse was like yelling at me to stop screaming. And she hooked me up to the blood pressure monitor and my blood pressure was 80. And she was like, oh. And I looked at her and I said, I'm going into crisis. I need my steroids now. They put me on the highest, like, dilaudid, like, pain medicine they can give you. And I was still in, like, the worst pain of my life. They put me on so much pain medicine that I was, like, flatlining with my breathing. Like, I was, because they'd given me so much that it was, like, stopping, like, my system. And I remember my sister was, like, freaked out. She's like, Mauve, you need to breathe. And I was like, I couldn't, like, I would just, like, stop. It was so scary. I was still in so much pain. They took me back to do another CT scan. At this point, they still haven't given me steroids. They still have not given me steroids. And that's why, like, we'll talk about this in a second, but that's why I'm bringing an emergency bag everywhere. So they take me back and they do my CT scan, and my whole stomach was lit up. I had my appendix taken out in 2018, and there was scar tissue. There was apparently a staple that had been left in, and scar tissue grew over it, and it became an epicenter of a giant twist within my intestines. So I had a bowel obstruction, which is, like, fucking nasty, but, like, that happened to me. Mm-hmm. And they needed to rush me into surgery, and I was so scared. I was crying, and I just looked at my, like, I felt like a little kid again, like, looking at my big sister. Like, I just wanted her to, like, make it better. And she was like, Mauve, I can't do anything. And I was so scared because I'm like, oh my gosh, I just got diagnosed with Addison's. Like, when you go into surgery, like, that's a high risk situation for us. Like, we need to have lots of steroids. Do these doctors even know about this? Because I had completely lost trust in the medical system between that one doctor and then my endocrinologist at the time, who wasn't great. And now I'm having to have emergency surgery. Like, am I even going to survive surgery? And I had just gone through, I knew I was going into crisis again because my blood pressure was so low, and I knew from the amount I had puked and for how long it had been, like, I was in a deficit for sure. I remember the surgeon came in and he goes, we're going to give you 100 milligrams of Solu-Cortef right now. We're going to monitor you. We're going to give you another 100 milligrams. And he went through all of the things, and, like, just hearing him, like, say those numbers of how much steroid and when he was going to give them, I was like, okay, he knows. And he had talked to an endocrinologist. I'm like, oh, thank God. And I ended up having a chunk of my small intestine removed, and my freaking six-pack was ruined. So my 6-week plan just got a hell of a lot worse, because now I was right back at square one. I couldn't even walk. With Addison's disease, it only further complicated the healing process, because I needed to be on a high-dose steroid to help my body, you know, enduring surgery and then having what it needed to recover from surgery. But that high dose of steroid also slows the rate of healing. Mm-hmm. So it just made the whole thing harder. So I learned a really important lesson that day, and that is to always carry your medical device with you. Always have that emergency injection kit on you, even when you go to the hospital, because I went to one of the best hospitals in this part of the United States, and I sat out there puking my brains out for hours, and I almost died from crisis again. And had I had my emergency kit when I was outside those doors puking, I could have given it to myself. I don't want people to be scared, but I want people to be educated and know that if it can happen to me, it can happen to you. So bring your kit with you, even when you go to the doctor, because you just never know. I did the things. I showed them my medical bracelet. Mm-hmm. I told them adrenal insufficiency. I'm steroid dependent. I said the key words, and it didn't matter, which is terrifying. So have it on you so that you can take matters into your own hands if you need to.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's actually crazy. I just can't believe the amount of things that has happened to you in such a short.
There was like one thing after another. It was
the mono.
Getting diagnosed, mono.
Yeah.
Then having an emergency small intestine resection.
Yeah.
And didn't stop from there. It still has gone on.
Yeah.
Because, you know, after that surgery, I buckled down, and it's 6 weeks of just like being sedentary, like being bound to the apartment. And when I finally had my weight restriction lifted and he said I'm good to go, that put me at the timeline. It was end of June, beginning of July. And I was like, I am so sick of having my life be dictated by my health right now. I just want to live. I just want to do the things that like I love to do. I love to travel. I want to, you know, I'm on summer break. Like I want to live it up. I've been at my house for 6 weeks doing nothing, and in the months prior, I was like mourning having Addison's disease. Like, I'm ready to get my life back.
Yeah.
So I started traveling.
Yeah.
And your body can only do so much. And I didn't know my parameters. I didn't know this is not the body that I've had for the last 29 years. This is a new body that I have, and there's new limits around it. I was trying to be as smart about it as I could. I knew about my medicine and updosing. I had taught myself all of those things. I felt rejuvenated. Like, man, I just survived like a crisis experience with that surgery. Like, that's the worst it could be with Addison's, and I survived that. And so I started traveling, and the heat in the summer and exercising and walking around and all of that then came to a head again. And I was at the New York airport standing in line, and I felt off. It was like all of a sudden lights out off, and my heart was going crazy. I felt like I was going to pass out. Talking felt labored, and I'm like, oh no, I'm going to go into another crisis. Holy shit. I was like, I need to eat. I need to get some food in me right now. I need to take my medicine. I need to pound sodium, all of those checklist items. I didn't have any food on me. And I remember I turned to the guy behind me in the security line, and I was like, do you have food? And he gave me a piece of gum because he didn't speak English. And I was like, no, like, I need food. And I started crying, and he didn't know what was going on. And I showed my medical bracelet. I'm like trying to take my pills, and I'm crying. I'm like, something's just like off. I don't know what's happening. And people in line in the security line started passing up a muffin. It went through like 50 people. They're all handing it up to me, which is really like really kind. And I remember I just like shoved the whole thing in my mouth, and I just tried to get food in me as fast as I could, because my blood sugar is like one of those things that can be wonky too. I didn't know what was going on. And there I am at the JFK airport, like, what's going on? I didn't know if I should use my emergency needle, but best believe I had it on me. So I felt safe knowing I had it. And I ended up having to mega stress dose. I took tons of hydro and finally got myself to a point where I felt kind of okay. And then when I finally landed at my next destination, I was out for the count for about 6 days. I was just like from bed to couch on a stress dose, pounding sodium, and I think I curbed having a crisis happen. I think I did too much too fast. It was really hot. I think my sodium was low. I think my dosage was off. Because again, at this point in time, like, I'm not feeling great on hydro. Every day I'm feeling low and off. And that day in particular, I felt really off. So I think I curbed a crisis there. So I went from getting diagnosed, mono, the surgery, another mini crisis at the JFK airport. I was like, this is all too much. So come August of this year, I was like, I need to slow everything down. I need to really buckle down and figure out this health stuff, because it's been one thing after another, and I've educated myself, and I'm learning a lot, and I'm doing all the right things, but I still feel really off. Something doesn't feel right. And I was bringing this up to my endocrinologist, and he was saying to me, he's like, well, that's not typical of Addison's disease. That's not typical of Addison's disease. And then wouldn't do anything to like help me figure it out. I was experiencing muscle twitches, tingling. Every day I was having moments where I would just feel off. My heart rate would go up. I'd feel hot and cold. I would feel overstimulated. Talking would feel labored. I would feel like thinking was like delayed, and I would have to sit, take hydro, eat, and do sodium, and then it would pass. But I was experiencing that like crippling moment every single day. I'm fatigued. I'm having to go to bed at like 7:38. I'm not feeling right. And so I'm like, I need to get this figured out. I switched endocrinologists. I'm like, I need someone that's willing to work with me, and this isn't working. Switched endos, and I told him, I said, I feel so anxious all the time. I wake up in the morning and I feel fine. And within 40 minutes of taking my pill, I feel awful. Yeah. That's when my tremors are happening in my hands, and I'm feeling tingly, and I'm not feeling right, and I'm convinced that it has something to do with the steroid. I don't think that I'm reacting well to the steroid. This endocrinologist said to me, he's like, okay, well, let's try out prednisone. You take it once a day. That's it. Let's give it a try. And I was willing to try it because I was convinced hydro was like killing me. I was not reacting well on hydro. And so we switched to prednisone, and it was like, for the first time in months, I felt back to myself. The anxiety was gone. Anxiety is like something that I've had my entire life, and it's something that's like very well managed. I do, therapy or exercise and all those things to keep it at bay. It's something that I'm like very used to having. It doesn't run my life. It's just kind of like a part of it. And with hydro, it was running my life. So when I switched to prednisone, all of a sudden it went back to normal levels. So I was like, oh, great, I can like think again. I just felt more consistent because with hydro, you have these peaks and valleys. It has a really short half-life, so you take it, it's in your system, but then it quickly leaves your system, and then you need to take another one to keep it up, and then you take another one. So you're up and down all day long. Prednisone, you take it, and it's in your system for a very long time. I think it's like 18 to 23 hours. So you take it, and it's just slowly in.
Yeah.
And I felt just way better. And so then I started working with him to fine tune that, because although I was feeling better during the day, I was waking up in the mornings really nauseous. And then by 5:00 in the afternoon, I was just tired. And by 7:30, I'm like ready for bed. And 8:00, I am out. So he ended up adding an extra milligram. So now I do 5 in the morning, and then at 1:30, I do another milligram. So I'm like, and then I go up a little bit, and then it's nighttime. And I still feel like I don't quite have my timing and dosage correct. I still think there needs to be some like wiggle room on that to get it better. But I do feel better than I did when I was on hydro. Night and day difference.
Yeah.
But I still struggle with like fatigue and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think, like what we've talked about, like in time, I'll get closer to having that
in time, for
dialed.
sure.
Because right now I'm still, I'm only 8 months into it, 9 months into it. And 6 months of it was on hydro with the surgery, with mono, with all of these other factors that are making me burn through it differently. So I've really only had 3 months on prednisone where I'm actually now trying to dial it in.
So how do you feel like, what does life look like for you now? Like, how is it different now that you're kind of entering this kind of flow state of somewhat understanding? Because you have a lot of knowledge. A lot of people don't. Like, for me, I didn't do any Googling. Like, when I was in the hospital, I just kind of sat there like a vegetable and waited for them to tell me the information. I never thought to go and, like, seek information. And, like, what do you feel like doing that helped you a lot?
Having the knowledge has helped with knowing my signs of being low, knowing when I need to updose, and also knowing, like, what situations, when I forgot to say, because then, like, also, like, not that I want this, like, whole thing to be about it, but so after the surgery was this summer, and then I'm, like, fine-tuning the prednisone, but then, like, with my brother passing away. My brother passed away right before Thanksgiving, and it was, like, a big surprise. Like, I'm still in a bit of shock over it, but grief impacts Addison's disease because it is a stressful event and we need more cortisol. So here I am getting the phone call that I need to fly out to get to him at the hospital and that he's towards the end of his life, which is a lot for a little sister to hear about their brother. So I'm having to manage like my medication on top of like mourning my brother and saying goodbye to him. I do think that knowing the disease better and having that information, knowing that if you go through grief, like you need to be stress dosing. So I felt more prepared in that situation. Like I'm grateful that I had 9 months under my belt to know like I need to bring all my medication with me and I need to be stress dosing as I travel to get to him. I need to be stress dosing as I'm there with him in the hospital, and I need to be stress dosing after I leave. And also knowing my body enough to know, even though I might be on a typical stress dose, like doubling it up, there's a chance I might need even more. So I need to be watching my body and how I'm feeling and looking for signs of being over replaced, looking for signs of being under replaced, and using that knowledge that I have of how to do this with medication to find what works for me, because there's not doctors that are going to tell you, at least my endocrinologist, like I want to just hear, do 10 milligrams, do 2 milligrams.
Yeah.
They won't ever throw a number at you. They just say stress dose. So that responsibility then falls onto you to know what to do. And I think having that education, the knowledge base of Addison's and knowing my body better helped me in that situation with my brother, and also is helping me now as I navigate grief and knowing that some days are harder than other days and having to manage my medication accordingly.
Yeah.
So yes, but it's been one hell of a year. It hasn't been my year, that's for sure.
I feel like learning to also like extend grace to yourself through this season of life and like throughout our new normal is also a huge thing to learn to do, because you probably want to, like you said, you know, you hit this super low and you're like, okay, I'm going to make a 6-week plan, I might get back to normal, whatever, but like recognizing that that's just not maybe going to be the case all the time.
Yeah.
And to give yourself the grace and ability to just like, it took me 2 years to get to a point where I felt stable, and you're at 8 months, and somebody who's listening is maybe like a week into this, or 20 years.
Totally. And that has been a really big learning curve, because I think I've always had this baseline of health, and this baseline of like, I can push through it and I'll be fine.
Yeah.
It's like you kind of had the rug pulled from under you, and it is about reestablishing where your boundaries are and borders are and your edges are, and relearning yourself and
Everything.
It's
like relearning to walk.
It is like an emotional roller coaster, and you do, at the end of the day, it comes down to just, like you said, giving yourself grace, because it's like, I'm not the same person I was. I'm not in the same body I was. And I have to remind myself actively, like, I have gone through a lot. My body has gone through a lot, but my body is also fighting really hard for me. And if my body is giving me signs that it needs a day of rest, it's my obligation to my body to give it that, because it's been working so hard for me.
That's a really good take, actually. Yeah, that was something that I realized after, in retrospect, after kind of going through the process of mourning my new, you know, or the kind of passing of my old life, and realizing that it's going to look a lot different. Realizing how strong our bodies actually are, even though it was taken to like the pits of the pits, realizing how actually crazy it is that, like, you and I were talking yesterday about us eating salt and like consuming citric acids just with lemons, and how your body's like trying to tell you something's off. So even when you get those small little like nudges from your body of like, and I don't do good about this being like almost 5 years in, you're really good about like noticing, like yesterday my thumbs were twitching, and normally I'd just be like, oh, okay, cool, I don't even think about it. But you would be like, oh, you know, that could be an Addison situation. I'm low sodium. Let's take a liquid IV or something like that.
Yeah.
But being intentional to listen to those small little nudges from your body, I think can help tons of people who are struggling with like chronic illness and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that was like one of like the most vague things. It's hard with Addison's because everything does feel kind of like gray space and vague.
Yeah.
And I really just want it to be clear cut. Like, this is your dosage, and you're this and you're that. And it just isn't that way. And when they were saying like, you just need to learn your body, and people were saying that on Reddit, like, you just need to learn your body and your signs, that felt so vague.
Yeah.
And I remember, as someone newly diagnosed, like, that was like not what I wanted to hear. I wanted something explicit and tangible so I could work with that, instead of this like open-ended thing. But it really comes down to like, you got to learn your body, and it is noticing those little things, noticing the twitches, noticing heart rate, noticing blood pressure, noticing, like for me, like cognition, like if things feel slow, or noticing
foggy.
if things feel like hard to talk. Like, these are all signs for me that I experience that are like, hey, you need to have sodium or you need to up. But it took me listening and noting it over a long period of time.
Right.
Which like stinks if like you're someone out there and you're newly diagnosed, because there is no substitute for time.
Right.
Like, you gotta have that time under your belt, and you have to have that data collection process of like, what are things that start to happen within me during different times of the day. And I wish I could like give you a more explicit answer, but listening to your body, because your body is talking to you.
Yeah. Oh, it totally is.
But it talks to each of us differently.
Yeah. And that's the hard part, is none of it is the same. Like, your story is completely different than mine, and the boundaries that I have are different from yours, and like vice versa, in different avenues. But I think in like that first year, if I could say something to people, and I'll ask you this too, but if you could say something to people in like their first year, like, You know, they're finding this podcast because you know how it is. Like when you get that word Addison's disease, a lot of the times the doctor's not going to take the time to sit down and explain everything to you. So you're going to go to the internet and you're going to find something. You're going to find maybe this podcast. You're going to find Addison's Advocate Instagram. You're going to find you maybe like hashtags, whatever. I think the first thing that I would tell people to do is just be like super annoying. Like when it comes to advocating for yourself, like you did, like drop 35 my chart messages to your endocrinologist, be like,
and I did.
Get me in. Like get me the freaking, yeah, that's what you did.
And I got in.
And you got in.
You have to be annoying. That's such good advice.
You have to be, because otherwise nothing's gonna change if nothing changes.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so true.
Yeah.
Like you have to be that squeaky wheel, and they're gonna say to you, "Oh, we can't get you in. We can't this." You'd be like, "I want to be on a wait list. I want to."
Yeah.
And you keep sending the messages.
Yeah.
And I really like about that my chart sending the written messages. So there is documentation that you have been trying to contact them over a medical condition and they are yet to give you treatment.
Yeah.
Like, I think having that documented goes a long way, and it is annoying, and you feel like, you know, we're supposed to be, you know, we're part of the system and we're supposed to be patient and wait our turn and all these things, like, but no, you need to elbow it and push for yourself, because if it's not you, who else will it be? No one. And then you're just going to get lost in the dust. And Addison's disease is not something that can have delay. Like, we need to get help and we need to get treatment and we need to have a treatment plan because we are always a hair trigger away from crisis, and it is important. So you've got to like fight for yourself and be annoying.
Yeah.
You just do.
You do. And then to even like do what you did and just like find other people who have it and like pester them and annoy them, you know, like DM them, call them, be like, hey, I need to get on the phone with you. Like, I'm really bad about it. People message me and I feel like a little bit of imposter syndrome because I don't have nearly as much information as you. Like, I don't understand really the intricacies of Addison's. And I think I was a little bit naive in the beginning of just thinking like, okay, well, my experience is everybody's experience because I don't have a grid for other people's stories. But after speaking with like Dre and Deb and then you now, it's like, okay, even between the three of you, you guys have completely different experiences.
Yeah.
She had a crisis in, I think, the JFK airport too.
What's up with this airport?
And she was screaming.
Stressful.
She's like, somebody stabbed me. And she's like yelling people to like inject her, but nobody was doing it.
Oh my
and you're asking for like freaking muffins. And
I'm out here eating a chocolate muffin. I hate chocolate, and I'm just, and I hate germs and strangers, and I'm eating the muffin.
You do what you have to do.
You do what you have to do. And I would honestly argue that finding people and sending the messages is not you being annoying. Yeah. And I think that every single person that I have messaged has really welcomed me with open arms, and I think that's because we have all been in this place where we get a diagnosis and you are lonely and you are scared, and that's definitely how I felt. And when I messaged people, everyone was just so warm, and they would tell me, you probably feel this and you probably feel that. And it was so true. I did feel scared and I did feel lonely. And they offered me encouragement, and I have made some of the best, like, I'm so grateful, like, you and I met. Because, like, I feel like I've known you for my whole life.
I know,
right?
Yeah.
And I just think that forming a sense of community and reaching out and getting connected with other people is a way you can advocate for yourself, and in a way it's also a blessing for the other person, because I think that together, like, hearing, one of the things that I've been having is a lot of like hand twitches and tremors, and when I told you about it and then you sent me the video of your tremors, that felt so good for me to know that that's something that you also experience, and it made me feel more calm to know that. I just think that there's a lot of things about Addison's that are not textbook, but we experience, but because we're on little islands, we don't really know if it's normal for us just normal for Addison's. So being able to be more connected and to talk about these symptoms with each other, we can find those common ground things that are not going to be in the textbook, but we know because we live it in our day-to-day.
That's good.
And I think that's really powerful for me and for you and for other members of the community to come together and connect, because there's not a lot of information, but we have a lot of information. Like you have a lot because you're an expert on you. I have a lot, I'm an expert on me. And just like you guys out there are experts on you. And if we can come together and talk about those things, we're only going to amplify our knowledge base.
Yeah.
And then be better prepared to fight this disease.
Yeah, well said. If you could go back to Mauve in the hospital, freshly diagnosed, new scary disease, what would be the first things that you would say to her?
I would tell her it's hard and it's scary at times, but it gets better. And that growth is slow, but slowly over the span of weeks and months, I will inch closer to being my old self again, and to just trust that I'm capable of getting through hard things. I'm capable of educating myself. I'm capable of advocating for myself. I have a history of showing that I know how to take care of myself. I got myself to the hospital when I was at death's door, and to trust that if and when it happens again, I will do the same thing. And just know that it is going to be hard, but it will get better. And to just sink into that blind trust that it is going to be okay as long as you advocate, you educate, you get connected, and you do those things, it's going to get easier. And I know it feels so overwhelming, and it feels like it will never get to that point, and like those hard moments feel like they will never pass, and when you're in them you feel like you're going to be in them for forever. But they do go, and you have moments of like peace and clarity, and then there's always something else that's around the corner, but like those hard things start to get fewer and far between, and just to keep the course even when it's scary. I think if you're someone out there and you're listening to this and you have also experienced feelings of isolation and overwhelmment, being overwhelmed with this diagnosis, just know that you have a friend in me, and I'm always open to sharing my experience. I know that my experience will be different than yours, but just know that, like, you know, I'm one person, but I'm here, and I'm happy to connect with anyone that might need it. And you're not alone. And you can find me. My Instagram handle, Levi will probably tag me, and I'm here if anyone needs me.
Thank you, Mo, for sharing your story. I think a lot of people, like I said, are going to be able to glean a lot of information from you, because you're kind of, unfortunately, have been kind of the guinea pig of worst case scenarios, it seems like, at least in that first year. So for people who are unfortunately also going through similar things, I think it's going to be helpful for them to have heard your story, and then also have the ability to reach out to and like connect with you. So like on that note, how can people get connected with you and find you?
Yeah, open door policy, just like my mom offered to me.
Yeah.
You can find me at her name is Mauve on Instagram. I'm sure Levi will tag me, and just shoot me a message. I'm happy to text back and forth with you and talk all things Addisons.
So on that note, thank you guys so much for tuning in, whether you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music or watching this on YouTube. Stay tuned for future episodes. We'd love to do more like this in person. I feel like this is the best way to do them, where you get to actually chat and look each other eye to eye. But, we'll definitely have some more virtual ones coming at you here soon. But thank you guys for tuning in, and we will catch you in the next one.